kitchen. I'm Daugherty. I'm the host of today's Dogg Dish. Today we're going to be talking about a traditional Irish-American St. Patrick's Day meal, the corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes. First thing we're going to do though is learn how to corn our own beef. So you can buy these in the store right now this time of year fairly inexpensively. This is this hot pink slab of beef brisket with the pickling spices in it. But I'm not going to do that. We're going to learn how to corn our own beef brisket. We're going to save these though. I like to buy these up this time of year, and we'll learn later in another cooking class how to turn this into a pastrami on your smoker. So let's get with this. This is a small piece of brisket. Brisket is the chest of the steer, and this one's a pretty good one. It's USDA choice grade. Just so you know, if you're not familiar with that, USDA Select is kind of the entry level that you get at your local Mega Mart or whatever. That's the stuff that they have on sale all the time. USDA Choice is a better grade. It's a grade up from that, and obviously the top grade is Prime. You're probably not going to find a USDA Prime so much on a beef brisket, but a USDA Choice brisket's a good piece of meat. And that is relative because the brisket is not a good piece of meat. The brisket is a tough old piece of meat. It's something that requires a slow cooking process, braising or boiling, and it requires a little bit of brining to be able to really bring it out. And that's whether you're smoking it on the smoker, or you're grilling it, or you're cooking it in an oven, or as we're going to be doing it, cooking it on the stovetop in a pot. So we're going to divide this session today into two parts. The first part is going to be how do we corn our own beef? And the second part, of course, is how do we bring this whole meal together for St. Patrick's Day? How do we corn our own beef? Well, let's take a little bit of time to step back and say, what the heck is corning, and where did the term come from, and where's the corn? There ain't no corn. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. The term corn, or corning of beef, comes from the days when the old Celts and Anglo-Saxons and our ancestors took meat and packed it in coarse salt in order to preserve it because they had no refrigeration. Corning is then a salt curing. Beef is not really a common commodity in Ireland. You don't see a lot of it. Only in recent times have you seen any of it at all. The reality is, for St. Patrick's Day, the Irish prefer what is called a bacon joint. And a bacon joint is any big chunk of bone-in pig, Boston butt, which is the pork shoulder, or a ham, which is the pork's hind leg, or some other big piece of pork that has been salt cured but not smoked. Now what we call bacon, of course, in the U.S. is the pork's belly that has been salt cured or sugar cured or a combination and then put through a smokehouse. The bacon joint in Ireland is not smoked. It's just salt cured. Now they would boil that up along with their potatoes and whatever greens they could find this early in the season in March, which was usually kale, sometimes cabbage, and other greens, and that along with maybe some carrots and so forth, parsnips, would become their St. Patrick's Day meal. The corned beef came about after what was called Ungor Tamor. Ungor Tamor was what we know in the U.S. as the Irish potato famine in the 1800s. In the Ungor Tamor, hundreds of thousands of Irish were displaced and sent scattered to the winds, a significant number of them winding up on our shores in the United States, most of them settling in the larger cities on the East Coast, New York and Boston in particular. What they found was when they got here, it's probably not a stretch to say they were not very well received. The Irish were ostracized, they were oppressed, they were not treated very well at all, and they were kept in ghettos in these large cities, along with a lot of other groups that were suffering from the same type of social ostracization, like, for instance, the Jewish. And the corned beef actually is something that we Irish Americans borrowed from our Jewish neighbors in these big ghettos and these big cities in the East Coast. The corned beef was something that the Jewish people had that was similar to the bacon joint that the Irish remembered from back home, and so they just incorporated that into their meal because it was more plentiful than the bacon joint was here. So that's how we got to the corned beef. Now the corned beef in New England and in Boston is not that hot pink thing that's infused with sodium nitrite, which is also known as saltpeter. It is actually what they call a gray corned beef. A gray corned beef is exactly like that, tastes just like that, it's just not bright pink. It has more of the natural color of a boiled beef. So we're going to do a gray corned beef in the traditional style that would have been popular right after the great potato famine among the Irish Americans in New England. So we got this piece of yeast here. So how do we corn it? Well, corning in modern times is not really a salt pack so much as a brine cure, which we now use to impart a lot of different flavors. Now, you can use just a already put together mixed pickling spice if you want to, and that's fine. That's what a lot of people use. That's what comes in that hot pink thing. Or you can put together your own pickling spice. And a pickling spice is something that can incorporate any number of things. Some of the traditional things that are in it would be bay leaf and usually clove, some juniper berries, peppercorns. I've got some chilies, some coriander. You could put cinnamon stick. You could put any number of other things in there. Garlic clove. All of these things go together, and what we're going to do is put them into what's called in France a bouquet garni. What that means basically is a bag of cheesecloth. So we're going to take a piece of cheesecloth and cut a fairly good sized chunk of cheesecloth like that, and we're going to take a piece of butcher's twine so that we can fish it out later. We cut the butcher's twine here. Move our beast over a little bit. And what we're going to do is take a fair amount of each of these, because remember, we're flavoring the brine, the water that it's going to sit in. So we're going to take a little bit of peppercorn, and here for this I'm going to take probably, about a half a teaspoon, about a half a teaspoon maybe of that. Okay. Juniper berries, a very popular flavor in Irish and in English cooking. I will tell you this though, if you can't find juniper berries, you can get them at some specialty food stores. Some mega marts have them. If you can't find them, little secret, use about a quarter cup of gin, because juniper berry is the flavoring in gin liquor. So if you use just a little splash of gin, that'll give you a lot of the same flavors. So juniper berries here, a little bit of mustard seed. So I'm going with about a quarter teaspoon, or a kind of a heavy quarter teaspoon of each of these. I've got some red chilies. These are hot peppers that I grew in my garden last year and then dehydrated and crushed. So put just a little bit of those in there. That'll add quite a bit of heat, so we don't want to overdo that one. And you can do without any of these ingredients, whichever ones you don't think that you would care for. We'll put a little bit of coriander seed in here. Coriander is the seed of the plant that becomes cilantro. But coriander seed and cilantro leaves have very, very different flavors. And there are a lot of people who don't really care for the cilantro leaf, think it tastes waxy or whatever. If you don't care for cilantro leaves, that doesn't mean you won't like coriander seed. Coriander seed has a very different flavor. So we're going to put in here a few cloves, probably about 6 cloves. I'm going to put in here a little bit of allspice. Allspice makes it sound like it's a whole bunch of different spices. In reality, it's one spice. It's just called allspice because it has a lot of flavor to it. As I mentioned, we're going to put in a couple of cloves of garlic, and all I want to do with the garlic is just smash it, just so it releases the oil. Put the garlic in there, and then bay leaf. Bay leaf is really necessary in this dish, and you want to put in a couple of good-sized bay leaves. And that is basically your bouquet garni. Now, if you also want to throw in a cinnamon stick, you can do that as well, whatever you like. I'm going to gather up the corners here of this and make a little pouch and twist it off. And I'm going to tie it with my twine. Wrap it around a couple of times, tie it off, and get that in there, and there we go. So now this gives me a little satchel that allows it to be fished out a little more easily. Here's our beast. We need a proper utensil for beast removal. Get myself a knife here to get it out of the vacuum pouch. And what you want to do with this guy, get him out of the vacuum pouch here. You can pat him off or dry him or whatever. You just want to take him right here and get him into your non-reactive vessel. And what I mean by a non-reactive vessel is something that is preferably plastic or glass or ceramic that is not going to impart flavor of its own. So, this little plastic deal has a separate lid on it, you can see. This is designed for brining. That's what it's for. It allows you to turn it, and it has these little dimples on both sides that allow the brine liquid to get up underneath and all the way around the meat. So that's really a good device to have. Now, we've got our seasonings in there. Next thing we're going to want is some salt. And you can use either kosher salt, or I've got sea salt. I've got a whole bunch of different kinds of salt here. You're going to want about a cup of salt, which seems like a really lot, but it's not. It's really what you need in order to create osmosis. Osmosis is just a big fancy word. It says that salt likes to equalize itself inside and outside the meat. So what the salt is going to do is it's going to stabilize the salt content between the meat and the water surrounding it, the brine surrounding it, and when it pulls through the meat, it's going to take all these flavors with it, and that's how that works. And that also helps break the meat fibers down and makes this tough old piece of meat into something real tender and flavorful. So we're going to put in the salt. We're going to put in some brown sugar. And again, as I mentioned, you do not want iodized salt. Iodized salt has a metal, iodine, in it that creates kind of some funky flavors. And we really don't want that. So, I'm going to put in some brown sugar, fresh brown sugar here, and I'm going to put in, about half a cup, about half as much sugar as I did salt. You can do a little more sugar if you like, it doesn't really matter. I like a little bit of the sweetness of the brown sugar, but I don't want it to overpower the meat. So, I'm going to do that brown sugar, and we've got our bouquet garni, and we are all ready for brine. Now, a couple of different options for brine. You want to put beer in there, and then you also want to put in some filtered water. I'm going to get filtered water here. So why filtered water? Filtered water, again, doesn't impart its own flavors. It doesn't bring the chlorine and all of the minerals and all the other flavors that are in tap water to the party. You want to start with as clean and natural a base as you can so that you get to decide what flavor it tastes like. And I've got a water filter tap on my sink, but if you don't have that, you can buy jugs of the filtered drinking water, whatever. Okay? Now, you have two options here. I'm going to go with the ale. Why ale? Because I want to drink that. That's not for brining, that's for drinking. Okay, ale though also is not a real strong flavor. It's got some flavor to it, it's got good flavor to it, but it's not as powerful a flavor as that Guinness Extra Stout, which would bring a lot of flavor to the party and maybe overwhelm some of the other herbs and spices. So we want to let that settle down, and then we'll see about where we are in terms of the liquid, and we just want to top it off so that all the meat is submerged. And you want to push the meat down, and of course what you're going to see here is as this head diminishes on the beer, the foam on the beer, there will be some place for additional liquid, and that's how we're going to go ahead and bring our water up to that level. Then we'll put our lid on it. Then this goes into the refrigerator and needs to sit in the refrigerator for anywhere from 3 to 5, even up to 7 days. The longer it sits in the refrigerator, the more flavor it's going to have. So you want to obviously do this maybe the weekend ahead of St. Patrick's Day, and that's how you corn a beef. When we come back, in the second part of this, we're going to talk about how this whole thing comes together, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Ireland. Come back and join us.